Hello, everybody. My name's Jordan Knight Mangum. I come through the Newell Nightline. Today, I want to tell you a little story about an ancestor of Polly Peck Knight. Now, this ancestor's name is Mary Peck Butterworth. She is a first cousin of Polly's great-grandfather, Hezekiah Peck. Now, while Joseph and Polly Knight have become well known in church history, Mary garnered some of her own fame, but for a very different reason. She was a counterfeiter. And at that, she was no ordinary counterfeiter either. Not only was she a woman working in I guess we could call it a profession that was dominated by men, but she, as one historian put it, she was the cleverest counterfeiter of her time. So, a little background on Mary. She was born in 1686 in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, into the prominent Peck family. Her great-grandfather was Joseph Peck, brother of the Reverend Robert Peck from Hingham, Massachusetts. And as part of this prominent family, Mary actually herself, at the age of 23, in 1710, she married a very well-to-do housewright named John Butterworth. Now, despite John being a well-to-do craftsman of his own, due to Mary's later fame, or I guess you could call it infamy, John would, for most of his life, just be known as Mary's husband. Anyway, by the time that Mary and John had their third child in 1716, just a few months before that child was born, Mary was already well on her way into counterfeiting. Like I said, just a few months before this child was born, her brother, Nicholas, had been put on trial and luckily enough had been acquitted of the charge of passing counterfeit bills. And of course, they were Mary's counterfeit bills. Interestingly, this child that was born shortly after this acquittal was also named Nicholas. Now, Mary's counterfeiting process was actually quite ingenious. She would take a starched, damp muslin cloth, and she would lay it on top of the bill and then run a hot iron over the cloth, thereby picking up the ink. And then she would transfer that cloth over to another piece of paper, which would become her new bill, and then iron that on again, thereby transferring the ink. And then she would go over the new bill with some quill pens to just touch them up and make sure they looked good and new. With that was her whole process. And once she got to that point, she was able to easily throw away the muslin cloth. She would throw it into the fireplace and burn it. So there was no evidence trail against her. She didn't have metal plates that a lot of other counterfeiters had, which would often come up as evidence later on against them. Now, Mary, she was involved in this process for about 7 years, and she was highly successful. Some of the some of the people that passed her counterfeit bills, who would later admit to doing it, they admitted to passing a certain amount of bills, which totaled about 400 pounds in currency at the time. But one historian estimates that she must have produced at least 1,000 pounds worth of counterfeit bills, which at the time was a huge sum. Anyway, so she was quite successful, and she counterfeited bills. Massachusetts bills, Connecticut bills, Rhode Island bills, so various different currencies. However, after about 7 years of this, her luck would start to run out rather. Nicholas Camp, one of her best customers, would be put on trial in 1723. And he would actually turn state's evidence against her. He would admit that he was passing counterfeit bills, but then also testified against Mary and her counterfeiting operations. But because of her neat and tidy operations, she was acquitted. They never found any hard evidence against her. Which is lucky for her because this trial, which had taken place in Rhode Island, again in 1723, the Rhode Island laws said that if she would have been found guilty, that she would have had her ears cropped, that she also would have been either whipped or fined, and on top of all that, she would have had to have paid double the damages to anyone that had been defrauded with these counterfeit bills. So she was actually quite lucky to have avoided all of that because there was just no evidence to convict her. So, but reportedly after that trial in 1723, she did give up the business and just carried on with her family life, raising 7 children, and actually lived to the ripe old age of 88. She died in 1775, just as the American Revolution was getting going in full swing.